The Ocean of Theosophy, Chapter 8, Incarnation, by William Q. Judge. How man has come to be the complex being that he is, and why, are questions that neither science nor religion make conclusive answer to. This immortal thinker, having such vast powers and possibilities, all his because of his intimate connection with every secret part of nature from which he has been built up, stands at the top of an immense and silent evolution. He asks why nature exists, what the drama of life has for its aim, and how that aim may be attained. But science and religion both fail to give a reasonable reply. Science does not pretend to be able to give solution, saying that the examination of things as they are is enough of a task. Religion offers an explanation both illogical and unmeaning and acceptable but to no one but the bigot, as it requires us to consider the whole of nature as a mystery and to seek for the meaning and purpose of life with all its sorrow in the pleasure of a God who cannot be found out. The educated and inquiring mind knows that dogmatic religion can only give an answer invented by man while it pretends to be from God. What then is the universe for? And for what final purpose is man, the immortal thinker, here in evolution? It is all for the experience and emancipation of the soul, for the purpose of raising the entire mass of manifested matter up to the stature, the nature, and dignity of conscious godhood. The great aim is to reach self-consciousness, not through a race or a tribe or some favored nation, but by and through the perfecting after transformation of the whole mass of matter, as well as what we now call the soul. Nothing is or is to be left out. The aim for present man is in his initiation into complete knowledge, and for the other kingdoms below him, that they may be raised up gradually from stage to stage, to be in time initiated also. This is evolution carried to its highest power. It is a magnificent prospect. It makes of a man God, and gives to every part of nature the possibility of being one day the same. There is strength and nobility in it, for by this no man is dwarfed or belittled. For no one is so originally sinful that he cannot rise above all sin. Treated from the materialistic position of science, evolution takes in but half of life, while the religious conception of it is a mixture of nonsense and fear. Present religions keep the element of fear and at the same time imagine that an almighty being can think of no other earth but this, and has to govern this one very imperfectly. But the old theosophical views make the universe a vast, complete, and a perfect whole. Now the moment we postulate a double evolution, physical and spiritual, we have at the same time to admit that it can only be carried on by reincarnation. This is in fact demonstrated by science. It is shown that the matter of the earth and of all things physical upon it was at one time either gaseous or molten, that it cooled, then it altered, that from its alterations and evolutions at last were produced all the great variety of things and beings. This on the physical plane is transformation or change from one form into another. The total mass of matter is about the same as in the beginning of this globe, with a very minute allowance for some stardust. Hence, it must have been changed over and over again, and thus been physically reformed and re-embodied. Of course, to be strictly accurate, we cannot use the word reincarnation because, quote, incarnate, end quote, refers to flesh. Let us say, quote, re-embodied, end quote. And then we see that both for matter and for men, there has been a constant change of form, and this is, broadly speaking, quote, reincarnation, end quote. As to the whole mass of matter, the doctrine is that it will be all raised to man's estate when man has gone further on himself. There is no residuum left after man's final salvation, which is a mysterious way. It's disposed of or done away with in some remote dust heap of nature. The true doctrine allows for nothing like that, and at the same time it's not afraid to give the true disposition of what would seem to be a residuum. It is all worked up into other states, for as the philosophy declares, there is no inorganic matter whatever, but every atom is alive and has the germ of self-consciousness. It must follow that one day it will all have been changed. Thus what is now called human flesh is so much matter that one day was wholly mineral, later on vegetable, and now refined into human atoms. At a point of time very far from now, the present vegetable matter will have been raised to the animal stage, and what we now use as organic or fleshly matter will have changed by transformation through evolution into self-conscious thinkers, and so on up the whole scale until the time shall come when what is known as mineral matter will have passed on to the human stage and out into that of the thinker. Then at the coming on of another great period of evolution, the mineral matter of that time will be some which is now passing through its lower transformations on other planets and in other systems of worlds. This is perhaps, quote, fanciful, end quote, scheme for men of the present day who are so accustomed to being called bad, sinful, weak, and utterly foolish from their birth that they fear to believe the truth about themselves. But for the disciples of the ancient Theosophist, it is not impossible, nor fanciful, but it is logical and vast. And no doubt it will one day be admitted by everyone when the mind of the Western race is broken away from Mosaic chronology and Mosaic ideas of men and nature. Therefore, as to reincarnation and metapsychosis, we say that they are the first to be applied to the whole cosmos and not alone to man. But as man is the most interesting object to himself, we will consider in detail its application to him. This is the most ancient of doctrines, and is believed in now by more human minds than the number of those who do not hold it. The millions in the East almost all accept it, and it was taught by the Greeks. A large number of the Chinese now believe it, as their forefathers did before them. The Jews thought it was true, and it has not disappeared from their religion, and Jesus, who is called the founder of Christianity, also believed and taught it. In the early Christian church, it was known and taught, and the very best of the fathers of the church believed and promulgated it. Christians should remember that Jesus was a Jew who thought his mission was to Jews. For he says in Matthew, quote, "I am not sent unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel," end quote. He must have well known the doctrines held by them. They all believed in reincarnation. For them, Moses, Adam, Noah, Seth, and others had returned to earth, and at the time of Jesus, it was currently believed that the old prophet Elias was yet to return. So, we find first that Jesus never denied the doctrine, and on various occasions assented to it, as when he said that John the Baptist was actually Elias of old, whom the people were expecting. All this can be seen by consulting Matthew and others. In these, it is very clear that Jesus is shown as approving the doctrine of reincarnation. In following Jesus, we find that Paul in Romans, speaking of Esau and Jacob, being actually in existence before they were born. and latter such great Christian fathers as Origen, Synesius, and others believing and teaching the same theory. In Proverbs, we have Solomon saying that when the earth was made, he was present, and that long before he could have been born as Solomon, his delights were in the habitable parts of the earth with the sons of men. St. John the Revelator says in Revelation that he was told in a vision which refers to the voice of God, or the voice of one speaking for God, that whosoever should overcome would not be under the necessity for, quote, going out, end quote, anymore. That is, would not need to be reincarnated. For 500 years after Jesus, the doctrine was taught in the church until the Council of Constantinople. Then a condemnation was passed upon a phase of the question, which has been regarded by many as against reincarnation. But if that condemnation goes against the words of Jesus, it is of no effect. It does go against him, and thus the church is in a position of saying in effect that Jesus did not know enough to curse as he did a doctrine known and taught in his day, and which was brought to his notice prominently and never condemned, but in fact approved by him. Christianity is a Jewish religion, and this doctrine of reincarnation belongs to it historically, by succession. If there be any truthful or logical way for the Christian church to get out of this position, excluding, of course, dogmas of the church, the Theosophist would like to be shown it. Indeed, the Theosophist holds that whenever a professed Christian denies the theory, he thereby sets up his judgment against that of Jesus, who must have known more about the matter than those who follow him. It is the anathema hurled by the church council and the absence of the doctrine from the teaching now that has damaged Christianity. But who really, as nations, are followers of the Mosaic law of retaliation? For alone in reincarnation is the answer to all the problems of life, and in it, and karma, is the force that will make men pursue the fact, the ethics that they have in theory. It is the aim of the old philosophy to restore this doctrine to whatsoever religion has lost it, and hence we call it the, quote, last chord of Christianity, end quote. But who or what is it that reincarnates? It is not the body, for that dies and disintegrates, and but few of us would like to be chained forever to such bodies as we have now, admitted to be infected with disease, except in the case of the savage. It is not the astral body, for, as shown, that also has its term, and must go to pieces after the physical has gone. Nor is it the passions and desires. They, to be sure, have a very long term, because they have the power to reproduce themselves in each life, so long as we do not eradicate them. And reincarnation provides for that, since we are given by it many opportunities of slowly, one by one, killing off the desires and passions which mar the heavenly picture of the spiritual man. It has been shown how the passional part of us coalesces with the astral after death and makes a seeming being that has a short life to live while it's disintegrating. When the separation is complete between the body that has died, the astral body, and the passions and desires, life having been begun to busy itself with other forms, the higher triad, the manas, the buddhi, and atma, who are the real man, immediately go into another state. And when that state, which is called devachan, or heaven, is over, they are attracted back to earth for reincarnation. They are the immortal part of us. They, in fact, and no other, are we. This should be firmly grasped by the mind, for upon its clear understanding depends the comprehension of this entire doctrine. What stands in the way of the modern Western man seeing this clearly is the long training we have all had in materialistic science and materializing religion, both of which have made the mere physical body too prominent. The one is taught of matter alone, and the other has preached the resurrection of the body. a doctrine against common sense, fact, logic, and testimony. But there's no doubt that the theory of the bodily resurrection has arisen from the corruption of the older and true teaching. Resurrection is founded on what Job says about seeing his Redeemer in the flesh, and on Paul's remark that the body was raised incorruptible. But Job was an Egyptian who spoke of seeing his teacher, or his initiator, who was the Redeemer, and Jesus and Paul referred to the spiritual body only. Although reincarnation is the law of nature, the complete trinity of Atma Buddha Manas does not yet fully incarnate in this race. They use and occupy the body by means of the entrance of the Manas, the lowest of the three, and the other two shine upon it from above, constituting the God in heaven. This was symbolized in the old Jewish teaching about the heavenly man, who stands with his head in heaven and his feet in hell. That is, the head, Atma and Buddha, are yet in heaven, and the feet, Manas, walk in hell, which is the body and the physical life. For that reason, man is not yet fully conscious, and reincarnations are needed to at last complete the incarnation of the whole Trinity in the body. When that has been accomplished, the race will have become as gods, and the godlike Trinity, being in full possession of the entire mass or matter, will be perfected and raised up for the next step. This is the real meaning of, quote, the Word made flesh, end quote. It was so grand a thing in the case of any single person, such as Jesus or Buddha, as to be looked at as a divine incarnation. And out of this, too, comes the idea of the crucifixion, for Manas is thus crucified for the purpose of raising up the thief to paradise. It is because the Trinity is not yet incarnate in the race that life has so many mysteries, some of which are showing themselves from day to day in all the various experiments made on and in man. The physician knows not what life is, nor why the body moves as it does, because the spiritual portion is yet enshrouded in the clouds of heaven. The scientist is wandering in the dark, confounded and confused by all that hypnotism and other strange things bring before him, because the conscious man is out of sight on the very top of the divine mountain, thus compelling the learned to speak of the, quote, subconscious mind, end quote, the, quote, latent personality, end quote, and the like. And the priest can give us no light at all, because he denies man's godlike nature, reduces all to the level of original sin, and puts upon our conception of God the black mark of an inability to control or manage the creation without invention of expedients to cure supposed errors. But this old truth solves the riddle, and paints God and nature in harmonious colors. Reincarnation does not mean that we go into animal forms after death, as is believed by some Eastern peoples. Quote, once a man, always a man, end quote, is the saying in the Great Lodge. But it would not be too much punishment for some men, were it possible to condemn them to rebirth in brute bodies. However, nature does not go by sentiment, but by law, and we, not being able to see all, cannot say that the brutal man is brute all through his nature. And evolution, having brought Manas, the thinker, and immortal person onto this plane, cannot send him back to the brute, which has not the Manas. By looking into two explanations for the literal acceptation by some people in the East of those laws of Manu, which seem to teach the transmigrating into brutes, insects, and so on, we can see how the true student of this doctrine will not fall into the same error. The first is that the various verses and books Teachings such transmigration have to do with the actual method of reincarnation, that is, with the explanation of the actual physical processes which have to be undergone by the ego in passing from the unembodied to the embodied state, and also with the roads, ways, or means of descent from the invisible to the visible planes. This has not yet been plainly explained in theosophical books, because on the one hand it's a delicate matter, and on the other, details would not as yet be received, even by theosophists with credence, although one day it will be. But as we know that no human body is formed without the union of the sexes, and that the germs for such production are locked up in sexes, and must come from food which is taken into the body, it is obvious that foods have something to do with reincarnating of the ego. Now, if the road to reincarnation leads through certain foods and none other, it may be possible that if the ego gets entangled in food, which will not lead the germ of physical reproduction, a punishment is indicated where Manu says that such and such practices will lead to transmigration, which is then a, quote, hindrance, end quote. I throw this out so far for the benefit of certain theosophists who read these and whose theories on the subject are now rather vague, and in some instances based on quite other hypotheses. The second explanation is that inasmuch as nature intends us to use the matter which comes into our body and astral body for the purpose, among others, of benefiting the matter by the impression it gets from the association with the human ego, if we use it so as to give it only a brutal impression, it must fly back to the animal kingdom to be absorbed there, instead of being refined and kept on the human plane. And as all the matter which the human ego gathered to, it retains a stamp or a photographic impression of the human being, the matter transmigrates to the lower level when given an animal impression by the ego. This actual fact, in the great chemical laboratory of nature, could easily be misconstrued by the ignorant. But the present-day student knows that once Manus the thinker has arrived on the scene, he does not return to baser forms. First, because he does not wish to, and second, because he cannot. For just as the blood in the body is prevented by valves from rushing back and engorging the heart, so it is in this greater system of universal circulation that the door is shut behind the thinker and prevents its retrocession. Reincarnation as a doctrine applying to the real man does not teach transmigration into kingdoms of nature below the human. End of Chapter 8, The Ocean of Theosophy, Incarnation.